Yeah.
Hello, everybody, again for our part two with Dr. Gail Robertson. Thank you for coming back on and surprising us with an additional interview opportunity to get to really dive deeper into what's going on in your world and well, bless you, where you've been. So, welcome back.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back. Sorry, I have a haircut too, so my hair's shorter than the other interview. So
Right? That's
fit that
quite
in
all
this
right.
morning.
Right? That's cool. It looks good. So, jumping right back into, I guess, not where we really left off, because you have so many facets to your journey. I would like to kind of cover some additional facets than just being a euphonium artist, tuba artist, diving into some jazz, maybe some the International Women's Brass Conference, composing, to the Leonard Falcone, being on the board there, to being on the board at ITEA, and then being the chair and chief editor of the Tuba Euphonium Press. There's so much to unpack here within this particular interview, and this will be a completely separate. I will not put this. I'll put this as a second part, but not having a combined video, because there's a lot to unpack here. So let's start with the composing journey. I feel like that would be a good place to start, because that was before. I'm assuming that you composing happened much before the boards and co-hosting two conferences and all that other great stuff that you've done in your careers thus far.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the composition stuff started after I arranged and transcribed a lot of stuff. I only had taken only composition classes I took in my whole life was when I did one semester with Dr. Ricardo Lorenz at Michigan State University. It was kind of a great doctorate degree there where you had some electives and you could do different things. So that counted as one of my electives. But other than that, I had just kind of learned from the, recordings I transcribed, Danny Elfman, anything, Nat King Cole, anything we played at Disney. I think my first ever thing I ever arranged or wrote by ear actually was I had gone to the Canon music camp, and I guess I missed some curfew or something stupid. So I didn't get to go on the road trip the next day. I had to stay in the dorm or something. And I really didn't do anything that bad, but that's how bad punishment used to be. But anyway, I had some staff paper and I wrote out a 2-part harmony to the Earth, Wind and Fire song, Let's Groove Tonight. And I just wrote out that bass line and wrote the melody and stuff like that. And from then I got the job at Disney, and then that's where I think it really kind of skyrocketed, because the two befores I had an actual group to write for. It was a paid position. You got paid per measure. Back when I was at Disney, the company paid us for that. And so I wrote, and we were themed at that point, with playing on Hollywood Boulevard, Sunset Boulevard. So that's where a lot of the old stuff, the Cordettes, the Four Aces, any of that old, sort of old timey stuff was the music I focused on. And then if you ventured down the street at Disney MGM Studios, and you got to like where the animation area was, so there's tons of medleys I transcribed. There's the Little Mermaid things, there's Hunchback of Notre Dame, there's Aladdin. So any of those movies that was happened between 1989 and 99, I had medleys for all of that. Lion King. And then if you went beyond there, then you were by the Great Movie Ride, and back there is where all the Danny Elfman stuff. And so I've got a lot of John Williams, the Parade of the Slave Children from the Indiana Jones. So I mean, all that stuff, I just transcribed it from hearing it, because believe it or not, there wasn't anything called an internet except for what people used to book airplane tickets with, and that was of travel agents. So you did everything sort of the hard way. So then when it came to composing, it seemed so easy because I could do what I wanted. I didn't have to, stay within this song. I mean, you could modulate that song. You could change the bass line to a funk. You could change it to double time feel, but you still had that song. So composing to me seemed like it was, a lot easier, because you didn't have to do somebody else's stuff, and it was like you were writing what you wanted. I would say the composition stuff is really more picked off, I would say, in the past 4 or 5 years. When I was teaching in Central Florida, I used to write an arrangement of something for my students when they graduated as a present. Well, now my students, and I have a lot, they often ask me to write a duet for us to play on the recital or
Oh,
something.
that's awesome.
So I've written a lot of things. You know, when pandemic hit, I wrote some pieces that you played along with the electric, you know, like the digital play along tracks and stuff like that, because we weren't using piano. So the composition has been there, looming, but it seems like it's more and more. You know, I just wrote my first brass band, or actually I've written two now, but I have published an original march for a British brass band, and then this summer I wrote the it's called the Red Firefly. That was it's a funk piece for the youth, the Brass Band of Battle Creek's youth band.
Well,
So
that's
you know, I've done some
wow.
compositions for large ensembles, you know, those kinds of things.
Have you ever premiered? Have you ever premiered or had a premiere of a? Um, I would say like a all-state band performing one of your pieces by chance.
Not an all-state band, but I had the Brass Band of Battle Creek premiere it at the Midwest Clinic. So I
Oh,
think
that's
that was
pretty
probably
awesome.
pretty.
And that
So we did that, you know. I mean, so I haven't done anything like necessarily for the high school band level, but that Red Firefly is written for like a youth band that's pretty good, and it was written for a featured faculty group out front. But that could be a piece. It could be a jazz band chart. I think would work great. I
oh,
mean,
that's
even though it's a British brass band chart, a lot of band directors come up to me and said, "Hey, you need to write this to be a big band chart." So,
huh.
yeah.
That's really cool. Does from my knowledge, there is opportunities in Texas for an all-state jazz band. Is there something similar in Arkansas?
Yeah, we have the All-State Jazz Ensembles. I've actually been a clinician to quite a few things, you know, not now currently, but about 3 years ago, I was the head of the jazz area here. It's probably one of the only nutball euphonium players that was, you know, there's only a couple, I think Mark Dickman, and then of course we have Rich Madison, who were, you know, jazz euphonium players. But you know, I was running the jazz area here, and I got invited to do clinics, you know, regional clinics, and I was actually the all-state clinician for the second jazz band in Arkansas. I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago.
That's
So
really
it's pretty
exciting.
awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And you didn't see any euphoniums in the jazz band, did you?
Oh, no, no. In Arkansas, apparently there's rumor that they used to allow valve trombone players to play, you know, for a long time. And I don't know how long ago it was, but I'm going to say in the recent, maybe, you know, 10 to 15 years, they stopped that. And the reason was because the quality that the band directors were buying these valve trombones for euphonium players to play, but they were bad. Like, you know, to get I mean, I own a really great valve trombone, you know, one of the King 2Bs
Hmm.
that's, you know, really super happening. But there's a lot of those sort of made in other countries kinds of knockoff things that aren't very good. So I think that's one of the reasons why they got rid of the valve trombone in this state, was because I heard it was because the instruments were so bad.
So, is there a flugelboom part for any like within that concept?
You know, I was a very sax player in the jazz band for my, you know, my college years. There was one piece I knew of back in the day called Lonely Road that was written by Chris Vallata, who I believe was the Barry sax player in Maynard Ferguson's band, that was written for euphonium. And
Wow.
I've never played that. I own the music. I bought it way back in, you know, forever ago. But yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I mean, that brings up a good point, but I don't know. I mean, I know that, you know, we know Maynard Ferguson played some jazz, you know, of course, Rich Madison, Alice G. Alexander, you know, the group that has the most jazz euphonium, that brought the most, I think the highlight of that instrument was the Phillips Madison Tuba Jazz Consort, you know, and that had, you know, three tubas and three euphoniums and a rhythm section. And that was pretty awesome.
That's epic. Have you were you able to visit any of those concerts?
You know, the Rich Madison Tuba Jazz was kind of towards the end of that time. You know, they were doing stuff. I think they played Montreux Jazz Festival.
Hmm.
I never heard them play live, that group, but I have their CDs.
That's
You know,
awesome.
Harvey Phillips was in there. I believe you had Dan Parentoni, and Winston Morris was the tuba section. Euphonium was actually Alexander, Rich Madison, and I think Buddy Burroughs, I think, for a while. You know, there's a really great jazz euphonium player who's really a trombonist named John Allred. I believe he played in that group for a while. Mark Dickman has played with that group some, but the group has folded some time ago. You know, that's not still happening.
Right. So let's. So taking your composition, I know you have quite a number of pieces jazz wise. Um, how do you, what's the process? How would you describe the process for a beginner euphonium artist, beginner artist who is considering jazz or wanting to dive into jazz?
Well, the number one thing is you have to change your accent of the way you talk on your instrument. And, you know, the other day there was a sale at the Walmart, and there was a lady that was telling me that she had knee surgery when I was waiting on my oil change. And basically what I'm doing now is changing the dialect of my voice. And I'm not trying to make fun of anybody in any way, is what you do when you play jazz music. See, the number one problem with most of our players is they want to use sort of the same set of tools, and they don't put their accent on. So you don't ever say the C, the syllable T, like you wouldn't go ta 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 ta, but you go da do da 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 do da da do da. That's already hipper by just saying duh or do or did. You know, so if you get rid of the T syllable, that's number one important thing. The next important thing would be to kill the vibrato. I mean, you only use vibrato if it's like for a ballad or something like that, but ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba. I mean, you wouldn't want to have vibrato. So I think those are the two things. Most musicians that don't play jazz want to rely on what the jazzers tell you to rely on, which often is, you know, to buy some Aebersalds. You know, the Jamie Aebersalds. But the problem with the Jamie Aebersalds books, and they're great, is that they don't have a lot of articulations on them, and they don't tell you, there's not a lot of instruction. They think at that point you know what you want to do with the style. So basically it's just, you know, the lead sheet, you could say, you know, and then there's chord changes written out. I have some favorite books, and I'll send this to you. Cool. And you can, like, my favorite list of books that you can use for jazz, you know, learning jazz. There's a really good book by Jim Snydero that's called Easy Jazz Conception. I think it's got Slide Hampton playing on one speaker, and you can turn him off and you can imitate. I think jazz has got to be by imitation. I would say my teacher of jazz would be Maynard Ferguson. Anything by Maynard Ferguson. We talked about that last week, you know, but, you know, anything by him. You know, listening is so important. You know, I mean, I think some of the bags of tricks that I have that a lot of euphonium players don't have is that jazz side, but also how to play in a funk style. You know, a lot of the music I compose seems like people are asking for something that's got a funk style to it, because you've got to write the right articulations on that too. Mm-hmm. A bunch of quarter notes, you know, doesn't tell someone what to do. No. So, you know, and I was saying in our last interview, how I have my students all learn to play the B flat blues from memory. You know, and we talk about, you know, emphasis on beats 2 and 4, and then we learn how to do some basic improvisation and stuff like that as well. You know, I don't try to turn everybody into, you know, a big jazzer. I mean, right. But the problem with jazz is like the problem with someone who's never ridden a bike or never swam. You know, if you wait too long, they're afraid to start late and not be cool.
Right.
So start them young. You know, when I taught a bunch of beginner students down in South Florida, you know, when I was living in Orlando, not South Central Florida, I had a bunch of trombones my dad would pick up at the flea market, and I had every euphonium kid was playing trombone as well. Because if you could get them learning that in 6th or 7th or 8th grade, they weren't afraid when they hit high school.
Right. And that's it's really awesome that you brought that secondary instrument to the table, because within, as we were talking about last week with the military band auditions and stuff like that, not so much the Army component, which would be useful, but the naval component to the military music side, you almost always have to have a secondary instrument in any.
Well, doubling is important. I mean, that's another whole can of worms too. I mean, if you only play euphonium, it's a scarier, riskier path. Now I do make the most of my, you know, when I go on the road doing like more international style, you know, performances and stuff, it's always on euphonium. But if I'm planning to make money anywhere here in town locally, it's, you know, Easter Sunday and Christmas, it's always on trombone and tuba. So if I didn't play trombone and tuba, I wouldn't make any money probably at a church gig unless they were just being nice. Because a lot of that stuff is they want the fanfare effect of the 2 trumpets, 2 trombones. You know, the tuba is going to have a bigger sound, obviously, than the euphonium, even if you have a great low register. So, I mean, I think it's important to double. I mean, you don't want to be a jack of all trades. You know, if someone was going to move to, you know, sort of a commercial town and they were a tuba player, I would have them learn electric bass. They would play bass and tuba. If you're going to go to, you know, commercial side of town and you're a euphonium player, you better darn well probably learn trombone.
Right. Or trumpet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not a lot of people double on euphonium trumpet. I've had two in my career that were decent. You know, one was Ryan Chen back in the day, but I don't think he plays trumpet anymore. And then, of course, Thomas Jansen, who's a recent graduate from here, he's great lead trumpet player and, you know, and a euphonium player. But, you know, I'm just, that's not normal. I mean, I don't think people would even, they'd never see a job opening for jazz trumpet and euphonium.
What about bass trumpet? I know when I first got to the School of Music, I would go down the Hall of Instruments. I see bass trumpet. Do you think that that would be a kind of a, even in the orchestral setting? But is that more jazz too?
Well, no, I mean, I like playing jazz. We formed a quintet here, you know, jazz combo here at my school some years ago, and I played bass trumpet in it because it's definitely, it's, you know, more accepted, even though it sounds wrong. I mean, you can show up at the gig and it's the novelty of here's a woman playing jazz, number one, and then number two, what's that thing? You know, so I mean, you can do that, but if you bring the bass trumpet, I think it's more, you know, it's more appropriate. Not that the euphonium doesn't sound just as great, but I'm just saying it looks more. So I mean, I know valve trombone, you know, I don't know. I think if I were going to play in the jazz group, I would play probably the bass trumpet or the valve trombone if I were wanting to match the trombone sound, you know. But if I'm doing my own thing, I bring the euphonium, whatever. I prefer to bring the double belled euphonium. That's my favorite jazz instrument. And I could jump up there and grab one if you want me to play something. But yeah, I brought the double belled euphonium to iTech this summer and played at the Jazz Hang. And then, you know, it's pretty cool because like you can do conversations. And I've got a bunch of videos. I've got some videos of me playing some stuff. I've sat right in this exact chair here and made some videos with some Abersod or some of those Hal Leonard play along tracks during the pandemic. But you know, I think that, you know, it's just as cool to play it on British baritone or euphonium too. I mean, when I play in the brass band of Battle Creek, you know, I'm often featured with, you know, like a jazz solo on something there, and it's always on the British baritone. And that really, that kind of, not blast, but it really projects very, very well because of the, you know, the cylindrical size of it. You know, we did a big, they call this thing called the pub crawl that they do as a fundraiser, like on one of the nights during the brass band concerts. And I got to play in the most happening jazz combo. I mean, it was Rich Kelly on trumpet, Herlin Wiley on the drum set, who is Winter Marsalis's drummer, and we had Wycliffe Gordon crashed our set. Yeah, I'm just telling you, me on the British baritone, and I forget who our bass. They hired a bass player who was former tubist, who was awesome and an amazing keyboard player. But you know, so we fundraised. Everyone said that we made more money with our group because it was like we had the diversity of the instruments. And, you know, there was a woman in the group. And then, of course, what the heck is that thing? You know, the British baritone. So I think that, you know, there's room for the euphonium and the baritone if you have the right person. You know, I mean, I would welcome it. I know when I was doing those Allstate clinics, I brought the double bell with me as a clinician. And I didn't play on their concert most of the time, but I bring it just to play for them and introduce, you know, because they're probably thinking, why on earth is this woman leading this jazz clinic? And why on earth do we have a euphonium player? Because normally a euphonium player can't swing from a rope, right?
Right.
So I bring the double bell euphonium and I do a little talking at them, and then everything's all cool.
That's exceptional. I'd love to see if someone captured those moments of you playing that double bell in front of all those all-stater jazzers.
You know, I don't know. I know that you never know. There's always something rolling. Someone's always got a phone rolling. I don't know. It'd matter of scouring the internet. Right. I know that, you know, like I said, I played some stuff in my office and used double bell. I actually, you know, had fun with the double bell because if you're by yourself, you know, you can blah, 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 and you can almost do, you know, trade fours or trade, you know, back forth with yourself. I love it. And I did like Baby It's Cold Outside. That's like for two voices. And that worked perfect for double bell euphonium.
That's a great,
I mean,
so you actually, okay. So in some of the other interviews we've covered, you bring up a really fascinating dynamic of being able to make your own blue ocean, make your own job setting where you could go into doing a jazz gig by yourself and play all those two duality tones, right? With the double bell and create that conversation piece. And you're in such a small piece. You don't need a trap set. You don't need anyone else. And if you're that type of a person, that type of an extrovert to really go and do that,
Well, it's nice to have a rhythm section. I mean,
oh,
I'd rather play
absolutely.
with real musicians than a play along track any day. But I don't mind going by myself. I mean, but it definitely is a hard on your face chop sing if there's not another instrumentalist or someone on keys that's going to take some of the solos. Otherwise, you're playing the head, you're playing, I mean, everything, and doing the solos. It can be rough.
It can be, most definitely. I'm not a jazzer, and don't even pretend to be anywhere close to where I want to be on that. But for those that are watching who are or even considering in picking up the the this amazing tool that you have right now as a beginner artist, or wherever you're
Don't
at.
wait. My advice is don't wait another day.
Just
One of my grad students wrote to me a couple months ago and said, "Hey, do you mind if I try out for the jazz band?" And I was like, "Do it, absolutely." I mean, I would like all my students to play trombone. That all the euphonium, and actually, all the tuba players should probably play in the jazz band on bass trombone, or sometimes I've had a tuba in my jazz band when I ran it here too, because we had someone who was wanting to be in there. You had a marimba player, vibes or whatever, if someone wants to do that. But I would think in the beginning band areas and the younger jazz bands, they would welcome anybody so they could learn that style. Some of that music is written so you could have flutes, and clarinets. There's a whole front row, but it just takes the right kind of person, and you got to jump in sooner than waiting, because otherwise people, they're too afraid.
yeah,
I mean, at
absolutely.
iTech this summer, we had a kind of a goof. There was a goof where the rhythm section had been playing like a certain time, like might have been 10 to midnight. Well, the last night they're supposed to be there 8 to 10. And
Wow.
so we show up, it's the last night. Well, there was, the rhythms, we were on the phone, we find no big deal, but it gave us an opportunity to make something happen with who we had. Beth Mitchell was there, and she knew B flat blues or F blues, so she was able to throw down bass lines. And then because there wasn't a rhythm section with these faculty on the stage, people got up there, and I could send you a picture of when the people were playing that had never played jazz ever. We sat on the front of the stage. It was like, like maybe a step or two up, and sat, it was like, it was in like a ballroom kind of thing. And people sat, and we just went down the line and let people play. And there were some people that had never played jazz ever that played that night. And so it was like one of the most beautiful things that happened on accident, because they wouldn't necessarily go up there with a real bona fide rhythm
Right.
section. So
That's really
don't wait.
awesome.
When there's an open jam thing or a mic or some kind of thing like that going at your school, if you find some people, I mean, don't be afraid, go in there and ask them. And if they don't want to help you, find somebody else. But there's a lot of videos, but what I've learned over the years is that when you try to learn from sort of the real jazzers, and I don't call myself a real jazzer, they're always talking, and you got to augment this, and you got to play the seventh, and you got to blah blah blah, and you got to do the and it kind of makes people go a little nuts. It's just use your ears. Just basically use your ears. There's a form, it's a 12 bar blues. This is what's happening. There's these chords. And once you notice that's happening underneath you, then you'll notice that the underneath your concerto, the melody that happens here that comes back later. It's kind of that same kind of a thing. It's just, don't be afraid, but you just got to you got to get started with the right books. And I'll send you a list of the books that I think
Awesome.
are fabulous to get people started. But
Perfect.
remember, turn on the accent that I was talking about that you would use. Get rid of your classical style articulations. When you have repeated swung notes, people always swing the consecutive eighth notes. Do da do da do da do da. They do well. But if it comes in on the and, it's like 1, 2, 3, da do da do da do da. They actually want to go 1, 2, 3, da 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 da. But you got to swing the and. So that's normally the other pitfall. So no vibrato. Make sure you have the right articulations, and swing when you come in on the and as much as you do when they're consecutive eighth notes. That's the number one things I see in my players.
That's phenomenal. Okay, so we're gonna switch kind of into seeing how you've written a few pieces, and I know for a fact that some of them have been featured on some of the rounds for the Leonard Falcone competition, and you're currently it said that you're currently on the board for the Leonard Falcone, correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
I've been on the board now for probably 8 or 9 years. And I like being on there to be the voice for the composer side of things. I pushed for them to have that first competition that they had. I was telling them, you know, when you pick the repertoire, I'm involved with selecting music for the conference, you know, here and there for the euphonium side of things. And, you know, I had said that it gets difficult to find, you know, pieces that fits that kind of mold. You need 6 minutes of this, you need 3 minutes, you know, you need a 10 or 15-minute this, and the difficulty, and it can't have this, you know, so we should have a competition. So I think that's important to be there in that voice. So my duties are often involved with some of the judging things that happen. I've been involved with music selection. There is one of my pieces on the list. I think it's the first time, because I always feel kind of weird, you know, asking or, you know, submitting one of my own pieces. But yeah, I felt like it was time to put something on there. So there's a piece I wrote for Gretchen Renshaw James, who, you know, she's an avid biking person, mountain biker. And so it's about rock. It's called Rock Hopper, which is, I think it's the name of a Specialized bike.
It
She
is.
doesn't have that bike, but she says she loves that bike. But you know, so I wrote it, and it's about your journey up a mountain. You know, so sometimes that I'm in the middle of a piece now that's a duet for trombone, bass trombone, and tuba that will be premiered, you know, in about 3 months up in Seattle, Washington. And you know, and so that one, you know, I don't know, writing and picking. I think that writing the chamber stuff is super easy. Even writing the full brass band piece. You know, when they asked me about writing that Red Firefly, I was going to adapt Chameleon. I was going to take Chameleon, which we all know, and adapt it for brass band. I thought, by the time I do that, I could put a little more time into it and just write a whole new piece.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole group of kids was part of a world premiere, and they played something that was woman composed, and it was written for them. So, you know, the composition thing is, you know, everyone has a different approach. I know you probably have interviewed some other composers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've never heard of anything called writer's block. I mean, I have like writer's overload. There's so many ideas. It's, you know,
Yeah,
it's kind of
that's
crazy. You know, I compose all the sight reading for our band auditions here. I sit down, whatever the first melody is, boom, you know, and they're normally about 12 bars long, you know, that's like 4 bars of this, it modulates, you know, and it really takes me, you know, a matter of 5 or 10 minutes, put the dynamics, boom, click, done. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I have sort of a gift in that way. I think the jazz side is helpful, you know, improvisation is helpful. Having a keen sense of pitch. I don't know if I'm 100% perfect pitch, but I'm right below that. I try not to be perfect pitch, because I sometimes when you transcribe things, the exact key that it's in isn't going to work. So you have to kind of turn the knob, you know, to move it down a third, you know, and I'm an E flat tuba player. And so I have to be really careful of that, because I got to turn the knob, because I'm thinking a B flat's going to come out and it's not. So, you know, I think it's kind of healthy for me to not let myself be that. But I think having the, you know, the composition and jazz, and, you know, playing by memory, improvisation, having a good sense of ear, all of that is really related.
so with that side of being on the board and being that voice for the composer to get noticed, even, or to be even recommended to be on to have a piece that's on a competition or a festival like that. What would be some of the kind of tips and strategies to prepare a work that could be featured on a competition such as the Leonard Falcone?
Well, any competition is going to look for, a lot of times it might be a length of time that you need. So like the first round for Falcone needs to be, you know, like around a 10-minute slot or so, or, you know, there's a certain amount of minutes they want. So if something is 15 minutes, it's hard. You might be able to cut it and put some cuts, and sometimes that doesn't work. You know, if you're writing for a competition, I wouldn't want anyone to try to write something that was hopefully
Sure.
going to be picked. They always say don't write pieces just for competitions, because that's can be sort of a you know, a downer if you don't win or whatever. My music that I write, 90% and 99% of it is always, I know when it's gonna be played, I know who's playing it, and I know what. I don't just normally write stuff for fun, but I would say if you have a piece of music that you've written that you think would be a great Falcone or any competition piece, is to send the reach out to that person. You could reach out to the president of the organization. Like I know with the Spanish Tuba Euphonium Association, you reach out to Pablo, or I know that Eduardo Noguerolas is very involved with the competition side of things. Most of the time when the Falcone rep comes out, it's like the first stuff to come out. So a lot of other competitions kind of branch from that. That way we don't have our kids buying, $100 worth of music for a Falcone. Now they got to buy another $100 for this and another $100 for that. So, that Falcone repertoire is really it's a big trendsetter for the rest of the year.
Absolutely.
So, you would want to contact them. If you're writing something, I would say the pieces that are in need, in my honest opinion, is stuff that works good for the younger tuba players on their B flat or C tubas, not F or E flat. Like if you're looking for rep for high school, college freshmen, and that's that younger age group on the Falcone Festival, you end up playing a lot of the introduction and dance, the Barat. There are certain pieces that float in there a lot because our repertoire has grown with diversity, with lots of styles and stuff, but it also has really grown to the ability levels that's above what we might want to be able to put on for that. Even finding the good rep that's newer for that lower level for, the euphonium on the Falcone as well, euphonium and the tuba side of things. Lots of great hard repertoire, lots of great, things for tuba and euphonium, but find another really great gem like the, Cornell's Rhapsody for euphonium that's going to fit that time frame. It's a 2-page piece, the highest notes in A, what I mean? So you're not weeding people out. Competition music is important, that you have music that's going to be accessible to a lot of players, but easy to judge too. If everything is so easy and not super hard, then it's hard to find a winner. So you need certain things that you might have that's not to weed them out, but some challenges, some hurdles or hoops. I know with the International Women's Brass Conference, Susan Slaughter many times liked having a choice of 2 pieces. And you see that a lot of times on their competition where you could play either the first movement of, Vladimir Cosma's piece, or you could play the first movement of the Barbara York's, Creative States or something. And they're different pieces, but she always felt like she didn't want to turn it into some Olympic kind of a competition. She wanted to make it where more people could compete. And on the competition side of it, the more competitors you have, the more money you generate for your prizes and stuff like that, because you have more people that compete. If stuff is really hard, people won't do it.
Right.
This year, the Falcone Festival had the Jan Bach Concert Variations, which is a hard piece.
It is.
But we still had quite a few people compete this year, and it's tricky when there's an iTech year, but I think that piece might have deterred some people, but it's such a standard in our repertoire. It was time for it to be back on there. And that's a piece originally written for double bell euphonium, but never gets played on double bell. And competitions is tricky.
I saw that the new one of the pieces, I believe by Eduardo, you have to remove the third valve tuning side.
His Hispanic euphonium. I recorded that for him. I played that. I played that on some recitals last year. Yeah, that's a pretty cool piece. But that's okay. The multiphonics is a problem because they would know gender from that. So some of the extended techniques you have to watch out, or you just say no multiphonics. His piece having that third slide pulled out is harmless.
That's really awesome. It's not typically it's not utilized at all in most contemporary writing.
So I think there's a piece for tuba called The Grumpy Troll that's by Mike Forbes that might have a slide pulled, I think. And then I know there's a piece for trombone where they pull the F slide out. And so that's pretty cool. I think Blue, I can't remember the name of that. I can't remember, but I know Ava Ordman played it. And so when you play, the sound's coming out the bell here, but on that piece, because that slide is pulled, then the sound comes out behind you with that slide pulled. So yeah, there's so many things you can do. I don't do a lot of extended techniques in the stuff that I write. It's because not everybody can flutter tongue. I have a lot of students that don't flutter tongue. However, I have a young man in my studio his name's Jake and Ernest, who is someone who can't flutter tongue, but he taught himself by just saying huddle, like har, har. And I think we're using the word huddle, like where you just go, he was able to figure it out, but not everybody can. So you don't want to leave anybody out with that. Multiphonics, a lot of times the ranges they expect for the multiphonics is either too high or too low.
Right.
My best friend, my tuba partner in crime, Dr. Stacy Baker, her whole dissertation was on the multiphonics being for never working for a woman's voice on the tuba. But and I think there's been some more research on that. But so you take things down an octave or up an octave. But so yeah, I don't know. The accentic techniques is something you avoid. The links, the ranges, and it's got to be something that is playable by a lot of people, but still has some hoops.
That's awesome. So when it comes to competition, especially with composition, have you participated or know of any of the competitions that have a soloist as they progress in the rounds? The final round is where they have a piece written precisely for them on their capabilities and premiere it.
I've never heard of You Don't Know Me, Bring Your Own Rep. That sounds like America's Got Talent, I think, in a way. Which, I mean, when I was doing, this is in ITA years ago with the International Tuba Conference. I think it was at the Denver conference, whatever year that was. I was in charge of the Euphonium quartet competition, and we changed that so that it wasn't just pick these pieces you had to play, because it was going to be more of an entertainment setting where you want to, rather than sitting in a school bus, or in a box.
Right.
So that's one competition I know where you can bring, like the first round, you have to play these 3 pieces and one choice of your own. Second round, if you make it past, you have these 2 pieces, which are new, and 2 different pieces. And I think the last round might be anything goes. So, but in a competition that I know for soloists, normally there's a piece because the band has to prepare it. So like, next year, the Falcone Festival will be featured with band.
Wow.
And we have a Japanese composed piece that I sought this man out.
Right.
So, to get him, because I thought his piece needed to be there for this competition. We sought him out. But, that was one of those things where, you have to have the band prepare it before the competition because there will be 3 finalists. So I know that the Falcone Festival has commissioned people. I know Brian Balmages has been commissioned. And I believe Lance LeDuc might have premiered the piece he wrote. So sometimes the guest artist might premiere it.
And so,
but I've never heard of a competition that lets you pick what you want.
Well, not necessarily what you want, is having a staff or a consortium of composers that are there with the student artist group, and let's say 3 artists, and it's over, I want to say about a week or so. It would probably have to be a week or so.
That would be neat to have the mixing of the composers with the players. That happens more often, I've seen, at the International Women's Brass Conference. And again, I've co-hosted 2 of those things, and I've been the chair of that when they're like the proctor of, I guess you could say, the Composers Forum. I've served as a composer on that, and I've been, someone who was just mentoring it or proctoring it. And, that's where the Women Brass Conference has commissioned a piece that it rotates. But the particular year that Barbara York was there was the year they had done something for solo trombone and piano. And it's the year she wrote one of her more famous pieces is A Caged Bird. And Ava Orman was hand selected to premiere that there. But here's Barbara there the whole week. Well, I mean, I think she might have brought maybe, 5 or 10 pieces of that to sell. She would have probably sold 50 of them, if not 100, because she was there. Ava played it, and it was such a great piece of music. So, I know back in the day when they did the International Tuba Euphonium conferences, the TUBA conferences back then,
right.
Harvey Phillips invited, I think over 150 composers were invited, and there was a boatload of composers. So a couple of years ago, when I was president of ITEA at the 2019 conference, we were able to offer a composer's rate. which I think the composers got to come maybe for free or maybe only $50 to come. I mean, why would they want to pay to come to our conference? So I think it was free for a composer who was not a euphonium or tuba player. So like, I wouldn't go there and say, I'm a composer, I want to come for free. But someone like Barbara York, someone like, Betsy Rahm, anyone like James Grant, Erica Ways, and any of our really great composers, they could come for free. That's very helpful because people can reach out to you. I know that this last Women's Brass conference that Deanna Swoboda hosted in Arizona, Joe York was there. And, his name tag said Joe York. And we took that from him and got a piece of paper and said, my wife was Barbara York. Because no one would know that because she's passed away. Right. He had quite a few people that visited with him and talked to him. And, I think it's important for the interaction between the players and the composers. Absolutely. I think that would be cool. I don't know how often that, the competitions do that. I know we've brought composers to my university here where we played all the music of Barbara, all the music of T.O. Starrett. We've done that here in the past. And then the students can, meet with them and talk and ask questions, but it should happen more.
It should. And I'm looking forward to maybe dropping a few things sooner than later on that.
Now that composer I was telling you about earlier, that was, the Japanese composer. I didn't want to say his name wrong, but Satoshi Yagasawa, I think is his name. I'm not sure if that's how you say it, but he's the new Japanese composer that I found, and Mark Cox, I found it too. I think Mark Cox might have forwarded his name to me, and he's written quite a few pieces. So there are some great writers out there that we don't know of.
Absolutely. There's a lot of new outside of the box content that's been composed that I've been privileged and honored to get to see, or even get to be privy to that knowledge, or even the performance of it, especially in Italy and overseas. It's dynamic seeing where the euphonium is going, and in the world of like how you can make a piece your own, not just premiere a piece. It's literally your own, and I bring the whole concept of Dave Matthews it, where it's when you play it live, it's not going to be the same as when you recorded it.
Yeah, I like a little bit of chance. Like rolling the dice a little bit, like in some of the stuff I do where especially if you write unaccompanied pieces where it's going to be different every time someone plays it. I think that as a composer, if I put myself in the composer seat, it's the notes. I wrote a piece that Greg Lindstrom played. He's a guy who is one of my students here at UCA, who's, a non-degree student who's a computer guy by day. And I wrote a piece for him to premiere at iTech, and since he's a computer guy, it's called Code Cracker. And I thought, I'd need to write a sequence of notes, that would be like a code you had to unravel. Well, next thing I was only missing 2 notes, and it was going to be a 12-tone row. It was weird. So here's Gail, who writes a lot of Disney style kind of fun stuff, wrote a 12-tone row piece. And, I wasn't sure, because, and then he's all nervous. He's got the music. He's probably prepared it. And he comes to the first lesson. And it's like, well, let's change. Do you like this softer there? Do you want to put a fourth? Do you want to take that down? I mean, those kinds of things, it should be a mutual thing. I wrote it for him. Now, he didn't say, I don't like the title and blah, blah, blah. And I think it's too slow. I mean, that would drive you nuts. But he felt like, should we try this? And I even said, hey, I like what you did there. You added a diminuendo. Let's add that. So it's got to be that. I remember one of my best friends at composition is James Grant, and he'll tell you like it is. He's someone way worth interviewing if you can get James Grant. He's a baker by daytime and composer at night. But he'll tell you. I mean, we can't write pieces of music and just expect it to be perfect when someone gets it. That's how they want to play it. You have to know that there'll be some adaptations of it. There'll have to be some changes. Stuff lies under the fingers. Now, me as a writer who is actually a player of these instruments, I've already I haven't played it physically, but I've figured through it. So articulations, this is a good lick. But since I don't play F tuba, sometimes Stacy Baker will say, hey, can we change that? So actually, she normally plays what I wrote. But I know Deanna Swoboda asked me for a different note on something because it just seemed like it lied better in an awkward run I'd written. And I feel like that's great. And some other people have done that too. but I'm fine with that. If I was married to it, I'd say no.
Right? I mean, the conversation I had even earlier today, for those that are kind of following the journey along to the actual premiere of all these videos, is I got the privilege and honor to interview Betsy Rom, and get to dive
Well,
back into, yeah, she's phenomenal. Um, Getting to just
well, she was best friends with a really great tuba player.
yeah, she was.
John Griffith. And so that's where her thing started. I mean, she's an oboist. I believe she's one of the few non-tuba euphonium people, the earliest on the cover of the Tuba Journal, as an oboist,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, it helps to also be married to a euphonium player.
yeah.
So I didn't know. I actually didn't really connect the dots till I was like, oh wait a minute. It was just such an honor. I mean, we even in the transcripts before the video recording started, we even dove into kind of the military band stuff because of all the interconnections that we both share. It was really amazing. Getting to know a lot of. It's just really amazing how an artist and a composer has a duality that just a really special moment that even between you and I and interviewing, it's more of a kind of a old friend like conversation instead of a kind of a robotic type gesture. It's more fluid.
Mhm.
It really is. So wow, I mean, just even when you brought her name up, I was like, hey, I just had an interview with her.
Yeah,
That's
she's
really
great. Well, we miss Barbara York so much. I mean, her music lives on in this office here. I hear something by Barbara York every single week. And we need to embrace the composers that we have and celebrate them.
absolutely.
They're alive, and beyond. But Elizabeth Rahm has been writing stuff for quite some time. She wrote all those great F tuba solos that work really well in euphonium for John Griffith back in the day. And I know I was a part of a collaboration with Deanna Svoboda some years ago with Lauren Veroni Curran and Stacey Baker. We recorded all woman composed music, and she wrote a fanfare for that. And she's a really very nice lady.
She is. She's very. Um, I really want to see more of our composers who've written maybe one or two pieces, even for euphonium. They all deserve to be celebrated because
Celebrated.
they took the time to write for our instrument, and we're not really well known just yet on a grander stage, but I know we can be, and soon enough. And to bring conductors in from all across the world, and to there's some really special stuff that's happened in these interviews. Can't
Yeah, I
wait for
think
you to.
change is coming. I mean, there's a lot of change on the horizon. Things are happening. There's more awareness of diversity and stuff. And that can go good and can go bad. I mean, I
Mhm.
think it's really great to look beyond just people's friends when they, put groups and things together and seek, someone younger and newer. I know I'm involved with the Athena Brass Band too. And and that's one of the things where we try to bring in some of the younger students to play in that group so they're getting that experience because it's kind of like people talk about how the audiences of symphony and orchestras is dying away, or
Mhm.
the jazz music, the true jazzers, are they dying away, so we got to make sure we invite more people in that are younger, with ITEA, it's the same thing with that, making sure that our last conference we had was super diverse. It was great. There was people that probably got upset over that because there were people that were really great musicians that were turned down. But it's about writing a proposal and following guidelines, and let's take our chance, like take turns. You can't play at every single international conference, and I mean, I think it should be a rotation. And I think that there are a lot of really great young players that are emerging out there that we need to celebrate them too.
Absolutely, and yeah, there's man, some really cool stuff happening. Um, so when I wanted to kind of dive into your professorship over at Central Arkansas. Um, are you currently researching anything, or that's kind of like been your hobby that you kind of dive into, uh, kind of like how a person who loves chocolate will go to a chocolatier or whatever. Is there a certain thing that you love researching?
When I went back to school after like 20 something years and I went and did my doctorate, I was never someone who liked doing research papers or term papers or any of that. It was like I was the kid that waited till the day before and crammed it. And the last time I ever had coffee was when I was with Lynn Garcia back in the day. Lynn Williams was her name then, and her husband now, George Garcia, made some dang coffee so we could stay awake to finish writing our term papers. Well, I was that kind of kid, but when I went back to school, I'm an adult. I was 40 something years old when I went back to school. And I was very nervous about research, but I took a jazz history class. And of course, you had to take the research and bibliography class. And my research paper I did for the jazz history class, because it was on Duke Ellington, I somehow found, really good research with Juan Tizol and
Wow.
his influences on Duke Ellington was my paper. And it was basically because Juan was the non-African-American guy in the group. He's from Puerto Rico, and he was classically trained playing in this jazz band. Couldn't really swing from a rope. But, Duke Ellington could utilize him in different ways because of his technical playing. He was a great musician as far as technique. If you see all these licks, and I can share that paper with you, and but there's licks that he wrote that were really hard, that the easier on the beat stuff would be the certain guys, but Juan's was always like on the awkward thing because he was so good. That was something I was super really into. And there was only two people that were doing research into Juan Tizo when I did this, 12, 13 years ago. And then the other thing, but I haven't done anything since I've been here. I did buy another book some years ago. I saw it come out with more on him on it. The other thing I researched into that I really liked was the role of the euphonium. Is it still the cello of the wind band?
Mm-hmm.
And that paper was the paper I wrote for research and bib class. And it was an online class through Morehead State University with Dr. Deb Eastwood. And that dang paper on an online class won the research award with ITEA. Because there's a side of me that was quite the researcher that I didn't know was there.
Huh.
And I dove into that and found all kinds of stuff. I blame the role of our euphonium's decline in the wind repertoire on the orchestration treatises and books. The books that that if we look up all the orchestration books, there's hardly ever anything that anyone's using right now currently that has a good description of what we do. Mm-hmm. And I dug as far back as to like 1890s and found stuff where there was a book by someone named Kling, Kling, that said, only give him a wee bit of something of importance just to give him something to practice. There's they're not very good. It was basically putting the euphonium down so bad. And then you find one by, ML Lake, who like Mayhew just went on about how it's the shortstop of the band. And so the role of the euphonium it doesn't belong in a section because it has its own. It supports the trumpet, supports this. It's, so there's, and it really said it would need a whole entire volume to really, talk about the role of the euphonium. So those are things I did before I took the job here. Since I've been here, I'd say the research and stuff I've been doing has been maybe, you can blame it maybe on composition. Like last night I was digging around looking at Puget Sound, trying to find a title for this piece. And I'm writing for this thing later on. The code cracker, I did a lot of digging into code cracking, and I looked up terms for ham radio people. So in that code cracking piece, because Greg is a ham radio guy, it has the tuba spelled Tuba spelled out, and it has code CODE. It's rhythmically written out, and I've seen that before. But so I did some digging, and then I looked up like the terms that the code cracking people use. And there's like a list of terms. So those are like description of what the piece is doing. So I find that sometimes the research I do now is involved with the composition. I haven't been to a conference where I've presented something. I certainly should further the Juan Tizol and the role of the euphonium and the wind band thing. I should further that and present those, because those were PowerPoint things. I mean, I had transcriptions I played of the Juan Tizol stuff on a valve trombone that was a lecture recital where I actually played too. So I think that those are both really worthy of going beyond that, but I keep getting asked to do other things. So No time for that.
Huh. I have some ideas that I could swing your way. Swing your way.
Oh no.
um, that okay. So you mentioned Puget Sound. It's really interesting. That's one of my. I was able to go up there a decade ago. Um, and my wifey's actually from that area, had lived up there for a while, and they have a military fort up there that was really cool. That's, I want to say submarine base up there too.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so thank you for kind of going over the International Women's Brass Conference, uh, composing the Leonard Falcone, the ITEA. Um, how was it being the chief editor of Tuba Euphonium Press?
I did that for probably 4 or 5 years. That was kind of an interesting job. It was like in the transition of before ITA was sort of dissolved, you could say. It wasn't making a lot of money for the organization. There was a lot of time that was put into, you know, printing music and paper. And I think now it probably would be more successful because there's so many digital downloads that people do. It was a matter of getting people submissions and working with them to get it ready for publication, or having to be the bad guy and say, I'm so sorry, we're not able to publish this. I mean, it's not an easy job. I mean, I'm one of the lucky people that my publisher, Cimarron Press with Brian Doherty, I probably sent him anything and he would just, he'd just, it's always camera ready. I mean, I think that what made the job for ITA kind of difficult is people's stuff would come to you and it looked like it was someone's theory assignment sometimes. Not always, of course. There were real composers that sent great stuff, but when you look at a piece of music and there's no dynamics or style markings or articulations or instructions on there, it doesn't look nearly as real, I guess you could say, as when you see a piece of music that starts out by saying tenderly or moderato with expression, or and then later on it's got moving, but beautiful notes on the stage with no articulations is going to be really a hot mess with how people are going to play that. So I think that I send my stuff camera ready, and if people do that, then it's fine. I think it got easier for me just to have their files, access them and dress them up and publish it versus having to send a letter B, the fermatas touching the accent, or letter C, 3 before letter C, you got notes that are merged, or there's a rest that's, I mean, it was just easier for me to get in there and do the work. So, I mean, and I don't think anyone realizes, I think writing the music is faster and easier in some ways than it is extracting parts and doing all that. And I'm really fast and I have a system, but it's still going to take 10 or 15 minutes apart, depending on how long the piece is. I mean, I remember Stacey Baker when she first started digging into Finale. She called me and she goes, "Oh my gosh," with her voice. She says, "I didn't realize that you didn't just press a button and extract the parts and look beautiful." I mean, you got to shrink it, you got to reduce it, you got to grab, it's a crammed down measure. There's one big giant measure. I mean, we've seen that where there's one measure, the whole, the whole stanzas. So, I mean, it's a lot of work to do that. So being an editor of that was, but it was a challenge. You got to have time for it. And I felt like, I was spending a lot of time on other people's music and stuff, and I would rather be working on mine. But I devoted, that was a position where I did for some years. The thing that I enjoyed the most with that job was just the interaction with the different composers and and stuff like that.
And that's really interesting. That's kind of a nice bridge into for those that are maybe this would like bridge really well with the Kappa Kappa Psi Tau Beta Sigma membership focus, as with your experience with ITEA membership drive and the Tuba Euphonium Press, and that relationship building element, and as well as your International Women's Brass Conference, co-hosting that, and then being on the board over at the Leonard Falcone.
Yeah, I'm on a bunch of board of directors, and it's a lot of work too.
I bet. What are kind of some of the maybe 2 or 3 tips, maybe if you could, of being on that and on those boards?
How to get involved?
Go for it.
Well, I mean, If someone wrote to me when I was president of ITA and said, hey, I have a great idea, why doesn't ITEA do blah, 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 blah? And if it was a great idea, which almost always was, you'd say, oh my gosh, this is awesome. Can you come, and you invite that person to come on to, the board meeting, and you have them present that idea. I mean, sometimes people with ITA or any organization, they want to put down, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Blah, blah, blah. There's complaining. And I always say, well, why don't you present it to us? Why don't you do this? It'd be great. And there, and that was where, like, someone was saying they would really love to have the dissertations and things, available. And that went to the forefront. So that's happening. So now there's somewhere you can go to and you can find all the I think James Green, it was his great idea to do that. I think James Green was his idea. But so there are oftentimes, you got to come up with an idea. You also just reach out, just send an email and say, hey, I really love the conference. I want to be involved. What can I do? And then you end up being on this list of people who are wanting to do something. And, because a lot of times, like, you can send an email to someone and you don't hear back. So I mean, be ready to respond, be someone who wants to give. I mean, I recently helped a good colleague, a colleague of mine get on the Athena brass band. I nominated her, I recommended her. I didn't help her. I suggested she apply for the position, Colleen Callahan, and she loves it. She's great. She helps with social media. She's got some free time, so I mean, so sometimes people want to be on these boards because it's just a little feather in their cap, or they want to say they're on it, but you want people that want to be on there. They're going to do something.
Absolutely.
That's hard to find.
It is, especially at the collegiate, like within the collegiate level, and there's so much social life happening for even the chapters at your location, chapters throughout the United States. Having proactive members is really the lifeblood of the organization.
You got to make sure you're giving something back to. I mean, with Athena, I'm on. I like to help out with some of the personnel things and make some suggestions. I mean, I'm not going to say I'm one of the older people on there. I'm not, but I'm experienced. So I mean, I can be someone who can make a suggestion, or they can ask. I like to be there, not to do a whole lot of stuff because you want other people to do things too, but to reach out when you're supposed to reach out and do things. With ITEA, I just finished my 6-year term of that. When you do 2 years as vice president, 2 years as president, and then 2 years as past president, and you see how things run with that. And there's, Women's Brass Conference. I mean, that's some of those people have been, they're like founding board members, and then you have new people that rotate in there. So you just got to write to someone, say, I want to do more. Just let them know.
That's awesome. Well, with that being said, I thank you so much, Dr. Robertson, for contributing so much more. I had no doubt that was going to happen, and your joyfulness, your passion, everybody who's watching, let her know what y'all took out of this. And definitely hear my twang a little bit on that y'all.
You're ready to play some jazz now.
Yeah, I am. I might even. I don't know if I'd bring out my yellow tiger. I can't even get the fourth down on that plastic euphonium that I had from many moons ago, or my two beasts here in the back. But thank you so much.
Well, thanks for asking me.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to have you on.
I'll come back again. You got more to ask me. You let me know when, because if there was one thing I'd want to talk on with people in the future, would be about building the culture in a private in your studio, how to build a culture and how to make that thing happen, and recruiting and those kinds of things. A lot of young people want to be university professors when you ask them what they want to do when they graduate, and there's a lot of stepping stones to get here. So I'd be happy to discuss that. Maybe put a group of us together and we can all talk about that.
Yeah, so that's actually, I want to dive into that right after I hit the stop recording button, because that right there is someone who takes initiative. And for someone who takes initiative is someone who might be even on the ones that get the transcripts to all these recordings. So
Yeah.
we'll dive on that shortly here.
Well,
And
my
just-
last bit of advice is if you want to recruit people, answer the emails and care. Just care about people. Be a good person.
absolutely be willing to, when you do ask, don't be so picky as to what you're called upon to do.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your
Well, thank
serving
you.
us, and we'll talk
Been
soon,
fun.
everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Okay.